Rise and Fall of Chinese Empires. The objectives are: 1. Describe the establishment of the strong central governments of the Qin and Han dynasties and why they became the basis for future dynasties. And 2nd, summarize the technical and cultural achievements made during the Qin and Han dynasties, including the invention of paper and written literary classics. Now first, the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty lasted from 221 to 206 BCE, not very long. And in fact, from 400 to 200 BCE, China experienced a massive, bloody civil war in the wake of the previous dynasty. But it was in 221 BCE that the Qin ruler declared the creation of a new dynasty, and he himself, Qin Shi Huangdi, was the first emperor. And he would do so by extreme means. In particular, the Qin supported the principle or philosophy of legalism, and they changed Chinese politics to reflect that. So legalism was adopted as the regime's official ideology, and really forced all those that did not agree into brutal submission or even death, infamously even burning books, which presented ideas that were opposite to the legalist official philosophy. So he would famously burn and kill Buddhist monks and their writings. So he was very fierce and a strict upholder of the legalist ideal. Now, he fashioned a centralized state and created a censorate, which was that he had inspectors who checked on government officials to make sure that they were doing their job, which reported directly back to the throne. So the idea was that he had these spies, essentially, inspectors who would examine people and examine those running the government to ensure that they were actually doing as they were instructed, which of course is trying to create a tumultuous atmosphere of fear and submission. Now, Qin Shi Huangdi unified the Chinese world, but was particularly aggressive in foreign policies in particular. He advanced into Vietnam and extended the Chinese borders dramatically. Now, the major problem had always been to the north. So the Qin Emperor's major foreign concern was that northern region, which had a space in which, at least from the geographical barriers, was the weakest. Now, there was a nomadic group that were known to the Chinese as the Shan, who lived to the north near the Gobi Desert. So the Shan had mastered the art of fighting on horseback. Even it said that they would put their young ones on the backs of sheep so that they would train riding with no hands and to shoot arrows. So inevitably, of course, if you can imagine, these people, these nomadic tribes, and that's true of all nomadic tribes, were fierce fighters because the men, largely as nomadic groups, spent most of their time practicing riding and fighting and raiding. Now, this is, of course, the purpose why the Great Wall of China began to develop. They began to develop a wall on that north end to defense against these tribes to the north, and constructed, of course, early on of just loose stones, sand, and piled rubble. Nothing formal in terms of the Great Wall of China that we see today, certainly not, but loose piles and mounds, and meant to really slow down any attempt to make incursions into China. Now, inevitably, we're going to see that through time, China is going to be continually looking to the north and continually building and rebuilding this wall. Now, just to get a geographical image here that's clear. So China, you can see here, is pretty isolated. The Himalayas and the mountains and deserts, the Gobi to the north. But you could see this kind of opening space. Yes, through the Gobi, but also into what would be known, if you go further enough, north into Siberia, if you go far, far north. But of course these are the major regions that we're talking about, and this Shannu are near the Gobi Desert, and Mongolia and that Eurasian steppe region will be a hotspot for nomadic tribes. Now, inevitably, the dynasty falls, and a very short dynasty at that. So following the Qin Shishhuangdi's death, a period of civil war erupts, resulting in new dynastic powers taking and seizing authority. Now, this is going to be done by the Han Dynasty, which will last somewhere around 400 years, from 202 BCE to 220 CE. Now, they are one of the greatest, most long-lasting dynasties in Chinese history, and it's founded by Liu Bang, which was, interestingly enough, a peasant. He was a peasant in origin who became known by his title Han Gaozu. Now, of course, what's interesting here is that this becomes a sort of meritocracy, a merit-based system. And because he has no noble birth or aristocratic birth, he's a peasant. But through this chaotic, tumultuous time, he, having the merit and skill and knowledge, rose to authority, rose to power. And so this is going to reflect in the political structure that he's going to establish. He's going to reject legalism and embrace Confucianism as its core principles. And soon, this became the basis for an entire new state philosophy to govern the entire nation. So the Han rulers also kept the system of local government that divided the empire into provinces and countries. They saw that wisdom in terms of maintenance. However, instead of being dominated by fear and legalism, you began to see Confucian principles dominate. Under the Han Dynasty, China was a vast empire whose population increased dramatically and blossomed under Confucian thought. In addition to providing a strong central government, the Han Emperor continued to expand the Chinese empire, expand the borders. And particularly one emperor of note is Han Wudi. And he added the southern regions below the Changjiang into the empire. Now, forgive me if my pronunciations are way off, but the core principle here is that he's causing the expansion on the peripheries to bigger regions, which people have compared this to the expansion of the Roman Empire in the Mediterranean, where you see the gobbling up of near territories to create a true empire. Now, what did this technology during the Han Empire that allowed this expansion, what did that look like? So, new technology added to the economic prosperity of the Han era, particularly, as we've seen in other eras, textile manufacturing, silk production, which leads to great wealth. But other things like water mills for grinding grain. This is a huge breakthrough. Iron casting, right? It's not just that they had iron, but they were casting iron. That is, that they're melting iron ore down so much so that it gets to a liquid state that they can pour it into a cast. And even the rudder and fore and aft rigging that allows for the ease of transportation through sailing in a new and a more precise manner. You also have heavy cargoes to travel, particularly into the Indian Ocean, which is going to be a major hotbed and zone for trade, and which of course we'll deal with this later, but the Indian Ocean is this huge zone in which people are interacting in a new way, and this is going to allow China to really dominate on some levels. Now, inevitably, the Han Empire, like all empires, fell, and it fell into decay and then was the victim of external collapse. So weak rulers amused themselves with the pleasures of court life, just like we've seen in other dynasties, and the power of the central government began to decline. Right? They became too enamored with the wealth and power. And of course, this makes a weak internal government, which it makes it difficult to resist the northern incursions. So nomadic raiders on the Chinese territory continued in the north, and you see major problems there. But of course, perhaps due to the concept of the mandate of heaven and the tumultuous events that are occurring at the moment, rebels and rebel armies sacked the Han capital in 190 CE. And we see a general seize control, but was unable to solidify power. And so this leads to a chaotic civil war era, where there are civil wars and fighting that occurs in the collapse of the Han Empire, which of course has often been paralleled to the collapse of the Roman Empire. It collapsed under its own weight and under external invasion, and it leads to a war period, right? Warring in small communities and states that are trying to seize control of their various territories. Now, in general, just briefly, the culture in the Qin and Han Dynasty looked much like those that had come before. One significant and mentionable feature that began to emerge is new sculpture techniques. Particularly, what's fascinating is the terracotta soldiers. Now, these are statues made of terracotta, hardened clay. Now, it was in this last century a massive discovery when people found Qin Shi Huangdi's burial site with a massive terracotta army. And so you see a recreation of Qin Shi Huangdi's imperial guard, and was meant to be with the emperor on his journey to the next world. And so when they open the grave site, they find 6,000 figures were standing there just in the first pit alone. And each one was different. Each one was unique. Which goes to show the craftsmanship and the level of dedication here. Some have even said that each may have been modeled on a real person. So these were molded, fired, and painted in a brilliant manner, which was an interesting and lasting kind of cultural heritage of the Qin dynasty. And you can still see these today. So our objectives were, 1, describe the establishment of the strong central governments of the Qin and Han dynasties and why they became the basis for future dynasties. And 2nd, summarize the technical and cultural achievements made during the Qin and Han dynasties, including the invention of paper and written literary classics.